Seeing as how it's Halloween, I decided I'm going to review something spooky, but also something relevant. Yes, I'm talking about The Haunting of Bly Manor. I will touch on some spoilers, so if you haven't seen the series, I recommend watching it. But if you don't mind and you're just looking for a general recommendation, then maybe stick around. So The Haunting of Bly Manor is a Netflix series that's recently aired that is about, well, a haunting in a place known as Bly Manor. It focuses on several characters who work at Bly Manor and a couple of children who live there. There's some weird shenanigans going on, and yeah, it's a spooky show, so expect that stuff. You may not actually be aware that this is actually the second season of like a show that started with The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House is a similar sort of concept to Haunting of Bly Manor, except it's a very different story. It's about a family who suffered from a tragedy in this place called Hill House, a place that was already haunted. The way they are haunted and the way they deal with their grief has spiraled throughout their lives, and they're just fundamentally broken people trying to get by. But there's also mysteries about the hauntings and what's going on that's set out beautifully throughout. The direction is great, and there's even some shots that last minutes upon minutes without even cutting. The acting's good, and I just recommend watching Haunting of Hill House if you want something spooky. So would I recommend Haunting of Bly Manor all the same? Not really. There are good points, though, and I will go over them now. The direction was still stellar, with good use of editing, and a lot of the horror elements were a lot more subtle this time round, which you could see as a good thing or a bad thing, but it's like an Easter egg. That sort of stuff happened in Haunting of Hill House, and I didn't even notice it. Something I mentioned when watching this with my boyfriend was that I loved how there's themes of guilt, and how that haunts these characters. Hill House is very much about grief, but Bly is very much a guilt-driven show. Danny is feeling guilt about not wanting to marry her fiancé, who then died shortly after they broke up. And when I say shortly, I mean seconds after. The guilt that Owen feels about not being able to be there for his mother properly. Especially the guilt Henry feels about what happened to his niece and nephew's parents, as he's now their guardian, due to some tragic events that happened. I thought going in that grief was going to be the main villain of the show. Of course, I expected there to be like ghouls and stuff. I was thinking that this was going to be more grief-driven than ghost-driven this time round, but I'll get to how I feel about the ghosts later. The show is very creative, and I kind of have to spoil the stuff that they do. So if you don't want spoilers, just skip ahead or don't watch this video, just watch the series. Dream hopping is a very interesting concept that makes episodes feel trippy. There's one episode that focused on Hannah, and her memories just didn't feel very connected. It felt very unchronological, and it just left us with like a feeling of unease. We weren't sure what was going on, but that was intentional. Of course, it's designed to make us feel uncomfortable, and I think that's very brilliant. It's a very different style of storytelling, which I always commend when you're trying to tell a story and you're trying to do something new, especially from what you've done before. Haunting of Hill House was very much two narratives in one, but this is narrated. There was one episode that I wasn't particularly a fan of, but not because of this reason. But there was an episode shot entirely in black and white, and I think it was an interesting way to go. I don't think it was necessarily good or bad, but I admire that they wanted to do something different, and I like the fade into colour towards the end to sort of get us to speed with, okay, this is what's happening to the characters now because of what happened before. And the final positive I'm going to mention is the acting. Now, not every actor is brilliant. The child actors, I think, did a good job, although there's only so much you can do with someone who officially voices Peppa Pig. I didn't mind her as much, but I have a feeling other people might. If you didn't like the other voice of Peppa Pig in Doctor Who, you probably won't like her here. But everyone else was stellar. Props to Tania Miller as Hannah Gross, as she is like the best thing ever. She's pretty much the only reason I would tell you to watch this one over Hill House. But there are reasons why I would tell you to watch Hill House over Bly Manor. Such as the twist. Ryan and I guessed exactly what happened, like, towards the very beginning. We assumed it was like a Get Out style situation but with the children, and we weren't too far off. As I said, spoiler alert, but what essentially happens is that the children get possessed by some of the more recently deceased ghosts. Flora by the recently deceased nanny, and Miles by Peter Quint, who is essentially the antagonist of the show. I think that's another thing I should mention that I didn't put in my notes. There's not really a clear antagonist. There wasn't a clear one in the previous show, but it feels like they were setting up Peter Quint as an antagonist, but not really. But it's weird. I don't know. No, I don't think that's good. And it's revealed that they're possessing the children, like, just after midway through the season. Like, that's a bit too far in. I mean, it's the right time for the reveal, but the reveal was very obvious. So the other reveal was that the lady from the lake was there, and I think that was too much of a subtle thing. She did have a presence in her earlier episodes, but it wasn't strong at all. The only real presence I felt from her was like Flora's drawing or something. There were other things connected to her storyline that were explained in the black and white episode, but I honestly think they're trying to wrap up the loose ends in that episode of the mysteries and all that. And as all of that came out of nowhere, it just felt a bit jarring. Something that Ryan pointed out to me that I totally agree with is the music. The music was... As music goes, it is good music, but the reason why I'm not a fan of it and why Ryan's not a fan of it is because it's the same as from Hill House. And don't just mean, oh, the same sort of music, the same feel, or we mean that it is literally the same track from Hill House. The music composed for The Haunting of Hill House felt very connected to the characters and the story of that show, of that season. And The Haunting of Bly Manor just reuses it. I get why you'd reuse the same composer. Heck, I get why you'd reuse similar motifs and want to have a similar sort of style, but it's literally just the same track, possibly redone. That, to me, feels lazy. Whatever your intention was, I don't feel like you were trying to make us have any sort of connection to this show if we had seen the previous one. And something that they both do that, honestly, fair enough, is queer representation. That wasn't a good segue, but we're rolling with it. Haunting of Hill House had good queer representation. There were a lot of faulty relationships in that program, one of which was a queer one, and the queer one specifically had the character of Theo not have a stable relationship with anyone. And we see at the start she basically sleeps with a woman, but doesn't really follow through. And when she eventually does, she's been through a lot that season, but, you know, they do eventually hook up. Now, that was not the main focus of the season, hence why it didn't really feel too developed. But at least for what they were going for, it felt real and it felt natural. The Haunting of Bly Manor, and this is my final point in this video, does not do queer representation good. People are praising it for its queer representation, and I'm glad we've got a piece of queer representation in this show, and possible bisexual representation at that. It doesn't really feel natural. Now, I know I'm saying this as a man, but no, you don't do it that way. In order to form a relationship in media, it's got to feel earned, and it was a bit iffy. So there was a scene where they were all at, like, around a fire, and then Danny and Jamie took each other aside, and Danny confessed that she lost her fiancé. And then that was the scene they kissed. it didn't feel natural. Why did they kiss then? In fact, there was a better scene later on in another episode where it felt earned, where Jamie herself opened up, and it felt like they genuinely fell in love with each other then and there, and when they kissed, that should have been the first kiss. It didn't feel like either of them had anything to build their relationship off of, other than we needed queer rep, and one of them was nice to the other? This does evolve into another point. The final episode wasn't very good. It acted more as an epilogue. The climax happened in the first act, which was a bit weird, and then it felt like the true story of the episode was the aftermath and how it affected Danny and Jamie. We do get touches of like Owen, and we do hear stuff about the kids and Henry and all that. It was about Danny and Jamie, especially Danny, because she's now tied to the lady in the lake. Their love story didn't feel earned, so that episode didn't really feel right. It felt like Groundhog's Day, because it was like, she kept seeing it, but then Jamie was like, oh no, you got plenty of days left, and they kept doing that again and again and again. You could have had one of those scenes have, like, them try and communicate with the spirit. Literally every possible excuse that you could give to this episode and how they don't communicate to the ghost could be explained by why didn't they try, or why didn't we see it. But yeah, I'm not going to spoil everything. I do think when this season is good, it can be very much better than the first season. It's just a lot of it relies on child acting and a gay romance that doesn't quite work. So really, when I say it's better, I'm mostly talking about Tania Miller. Maybe a little bit about the character of Owen, who is played by Rahul Kohli. He was honestly a bundle of fun and worked so well with Tania Miller's character of Hannah. But if you want something spooky but also really good, just watch The Haunting of Hill House instead. Now, I must give special thanks to my boyfriend Ryan, who I watched this with, and who helped me out with formulating stuff to talk about in this review. Also, if this video wasn't Doctor Who-y enough for you, there is a video on the Whoniversals where I talk about the best and worst costumes the Doctor has ever worn. So thank you all for watching. Remember to stay safe the best you can, do all of the precautions to stop this current pandemic that we are going through as of this video. And yeah, I hope to see you again in the future, and stay tuned. Goodbye, everyone.